Welcome back for another Naval History edition of the Proceedings podcast. As in our previous issue, we celebrated the 250th birthday of America's Navy. And our new November-December 2025 issue, we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the birth of America's Marines. Our podcast today is presented by courtesy of Booz Allen. Booz Allen delivers outcomes with speed for the nation's most critical defense priorities. Work with the solution engineers who use AI, cyber, and quantum to help warfighters collaborate faster with allies and partners, from the open seas to the edge of space. Learn more at boozallen.com/defense. Well, it was 250 years ago this month of November that Continental Congress, having just established a Continental Navy, followed up with the establishment of the Continental Marines. Our current issue of the magazine celebrates this on the cover and with Marine-related content throughout the issue, spanning the gamut of Marine Corps history. But here today, we're going to talk about the origins of the Corps and the very first Marine in the Continental Navy. And from the rounding up of the earliest recruits at Philadelphia's Tun Tavern to carrying out a secret mission to save the revolutionary cause, Samuel Nicholas left an indelible mark on American history and on the legacy of the Marine Corps. Here to tell us about America's first Marine, we're pleased to welcome back to the podcast a former Naval History Author of the Year, William J. Prom. Bill, it's great to see you again. Congratulations on a wonderful article. We're getting some great feedback on it.
No, thank you. Again, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to share this story. It was exciting to put together.
Yeah, it turns out to be quite a multifaceted and interesting career that Samuel Nicholas had. So why don't we just dive right in and you regale to us the Samuel Nicholas story.
Yes, yeah, I was, like most Marines, very familiar with Samuel Nicholas, considered the first commandant of the Marine Corps, although as I point out, that title never existed during his tenure, but he was the highest ranking Marine throughout the Revolutionary War. And like most, probably familiar with the idea of the New Providence raid at Nassau, first amphibious landing, and maybe familiar with his participation in Washington's army. But after that, the general knowledge seems to fade away. So I was excited to dig in and found an interesting history with him that really led to what turned out to be what I consider the most impactful part of his career, this secret mission for Robert Morris. But before we get to that, kind of need to set the stage with him, where he is the son of a blacksmith in Philadelphia, a Quaker family, but very well placed out there. That his father was very successful in what he did, and Samuel was able to attend Philadelphia Academy, which would eventually become University of Pennsylvania. While there, his classmates many would become kind of future leaders of this new United States that was to come. Coming out of that, he was a big part of local, was the Schuylkill, I'm probably butchering that, fishing company, and the Gloucester Fox Hunting Club. These are high society sporting clubs, essentially. Again, where he's very well connected, well placed, and showing himself as a bit of an outdoorsman. And as you mentioned, that it was shortly after founding of the Continental Navy that Congress was now creating the Continental Marine Corps, and in that it's pointing out a certain number of flag ranks that they deemed necessary for the 2 battalions that were to be raised. But Congress first went to Samuel Nicholas for that. He had no prior military experience, but again, very well connected, outdoorsman, had a career in business. And really the most important part at this point for the Marines was recruitment. So being somebody who was very involved in Philadelphia in the tavern scene, essentially as a tavern owner himself, he was well placed to both be able to uh, go out and recruit future Continental Marines and uh, help with acquiring some of the stores and goods and equipment that they'll need. That'll come later. So he was selected as or commissioned as a captain in the Marines, the first officer, and would remain the highest ranking officer throughout the war. Uh, as I'm sure many are aware, in Age of Sail for Marines, it's working on ships for them, being ship's guards typically, and fighting in the fighting tops as well in battle is the what was standard at the time. And he was selected to command the detachment for the Alfred, a 24 gun frigate, currently being converted, former merchantman, into a warship. It was a very meager Continental Navy at the time. I believe it was 5 ships when he arrived, 6 before they departed with Captain Isaac Hopkins' squadron. Again, this was the first squadron of the Continental Navy to go out into war, and they were given orders to let me quote it here: search out, attack, take, or destroy all naval forces of the enemies in the lower Chesapeake Bay, and then instructed to work their way north, doing the same. Hopkins, as many I'm sure are probably aware, chose to go south instead for the Bahamas. This wasn't a mere whim or disregard. Well, it was a disregard of orders, but the idea was essentially that it was well known that Nassau had plentiful military stores, which the Continental Army was in drastic need of, and it was poorly defended. They said the war is coming to North America, so the British colonies in the Caribbean were not as highly manned as they had been probably the year prior. So the thought was to go and essentially take those stores, mainly gunpowder and cannons. So the squadron makes for New Providence. They arrive March 1st, 1776, off Nassau to help, and then spend the next day preparing for that assault. And this turns out to be the first amphibious raid by Marines and Navy for the U.S., which, again, Samuel Nicholas led. He had 234 Marines and 50 sailors in their first landing 2 miles east of Fort Montague, which was one of 2 forts, this one to the east of Fort Nassau, or of the town of Nassau, excuse me. The colony or the city itself, as I mentioned, not highly defended. It did have these 2 forts. There was essentially a derelict hulk, I think of 4 guns in the harbor, about 300 militiamen on hand at any given time. However, this was a seafaring community, so it's not reasonable to expect for more than half of them to actually be available at a moment's notice when the call comes, because they're going to be out at sea, whether it's fishing or as merchants. But so Samuel Nicholas had similar amount, about 284 in his landing of sailors and Marines, but unaware of what exactly they're getting into as far as what the composition of the enemy is going to be. And they're making their way towards Fort Nassau, towards Fort Montague. And this is, it's one of those, looking back on it, you see, oh, this probably not all that challenging, but with the fog of war, being unaware of what they're truly facing, probably one of the most perilous moments. The governor had already essentially ordered the retreat of the fort, told the guards to fire the guns and then support them, so make them unusable for the enemy and retreat. And this is a point where they're needing to kind of march and scale a mountainside practically to get up to the fort, being fired down upon. But it was just the one volley, no casualties, and they continue on to the fort, where they're informed that they were ordered to surrender it, that the British soldiers were ordered to surrender the fort to Nicholas. Again, so quick victory there without a shot fired by the Americans. But again, not knowing what's next, decides to remain there for the night. They had again landed in the afternoon, made their 2-mile march, and then the attack on the fort. So it was evening at that point, and decided basically send out scouts and camp overnight to prepare for what he was assuming was going to be the consolidated force in the town of Nassau. Uh, Thankfully for him, when they arose before dawn, so that they're arriving at the town at dawn, only to be essentially welcomed in, being told that the forts are abandoned. The governor is in the governor house. But unfortunately, while all that was going on during the night, about 2/3 to 3/4 of the gunpowder that was being stored in the city had been loaded onto a ship and sailed away for, I believe, St. Augustine. So a bit unfortunate. That was the main reason Hopkins went to Nassau, was to get those stores. So they didn't get all the powder they wanted, but they did come away with, I want to check my notes here, it's 88 cannons, 15 mortars, over 11,000 in assorted shot, 24 powder caskets, and a variety of other ammunition, military stores, and prisoners for bargaining with. So it was still a hefty haul, enough that they had to charter on another ship just to bring it all back. They didn't have enough in the squadron to begin with.
I always like revisiting this account. It's fascinating in a way. It's somehow ironic that the very first Navy expedition, the Commodore goes off orders and goes his own way, albeit for an arguably very good reason. But I always thought, if Hopkins had just gone back to the Atlantic coast after doing that, get back to the original mission, he probably would have maybe gotten a little bit, sanctioned for what he did. But he goes off toward Rhode Island. And so later, of course, he's going to have the book thrown at him by Congress. But when he does that, they get involved in some fighting at sea. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and so the squadron comes upon the 20-gun HMS Glasgow, and this becomes the first squadron attack by the U.S. Navy on an enemy ship. And it was, while the attack on Nassau was relatively bloodless, not a shot fired by the Americans, this was quite different. It was a bloody battle, and one of the first volleys of the attack, Lieutenant Park, I believe it was Lieutenant Park, but one of Nicholas's lieutenants gets shot in the head right in front of him on the quarterdeck. That it was a violent campaign that also, unfortunately, didn't end up all that well. The Glasgow got away. There was a lot of finger pointing among the different ships as far as who should have been engaging at what point, and others not. You could see the kind of I don't want to call it a lack of professionalism. It's more of a lack of experience is a thing as far as a Navy operating as a squadron. It's a complicated thing to drive a warship, a ship of sail at the time. That was the most complicated piece of machinery. The idea of all of a sudden being able to coherently coordinate six ships attacking one is a tall order, quite frankly. And so it shows a bit of the experience gap between the Continental Navy and the British Navy, certainly. But yeah, it was one that tested Nicholas and the Marines, and it was the test went well for them, quite frankly, and that the Glasgow reported after the engagement that I believe it was all of their casualties came from the musketry, from the snipers, the Marines in the fighting tops of those ships. But yes, as you said, that it's if Hopkins would have made away with a little more treasure and maybe a little more successful on the way back, Congress could have turned an eye at the disregard, but it certainly made it a little harder to ignore.
Right. It led to his very extremely short-lived career.
Yes.
So here we have Samuel Hopkins now has led the Marines' first amphibious landing and their first battle at sea. That's a lot of firsts in a row.
Yes.
But he's just getting started in this revolutionary effort. You mentioned a lot of folks are familiar with the fact that he fought with General Washington's army, but that's a pretty good story too. I mean, they're there at the pivotal Battle of Princeton, right on the heels of Trenton, which turns the tide for us at a very dark moment in the war. So let's talk about the Marine involvement with General Washington.
Yeah, absolutely.
First of its own.
Yeah, after that squadron returned, Nicholas eventually makes it back to Philadelphia because it's at that point only the smaller ships are getting out, and they were again going back to recruitment. That was really one of the main things Marine officers were doing during the war, is getting Marines for on these ships. And he found out he was promoted to major at that time, which also ironically meant that he couldn't get on ship even if he wanted to, because it meant that Congress had decided that a major is for a ship of the line, which we had none at that point. So he was leading the recruitment efforts in Philadelphia. And as you mentioned, it was at a pivotal point. Washington was not fleeing, but retreating from New York after the loss there in the winter of 1776. And the British are making their way towards the capital at that point, towards Philadelphia. And to help defend the city, everybody's being called out. So it's not just the Continental Marines, it's the state Marines, it's sailors from those ships, it's the Pennsylvania Associators, which are the militia, essentially, to form additional divisions. And the Marines under Nicholas joined Cadwallader's division. And before I forget, I should mention also, there's a great book, Washington's Marines, by General Jason Baum, came out maybe a couple of years ago, is an excellent resource of this whole campaign, really getting into does a great job in heightening the intensity of the period, that it was on a knife's edge in many ways. And then really going into the detail of the Marines' involvement in this. But that aside, mostly needed to make sure he got his plug, because it's a wonderful book and it was a great resource for this article. But so we have Washington's famous crossing of the Delaware. Cadwallader was supposed to with his division, but they were at a different point in the river with a lot of thick ice, heavy winds. He had his forward element had made it across and just found it untenable. And they retreated, not knowing that Washington had crossed, had attacked successfully, and come back across the river. So he starts out and crosses the next day, thinking that he's going to rejoin with Washington. Finds out Washington didn't. And there's maybe you could question, is this trying to make up for not making it the first time, or is it like truly trying to make a strategic foothold into New Jersey? But Cadwallader pushes forward, and they're basically marching to catch the retreating Hessians and British. And there's scouting parties going out. Nicholas himself is leading several of those. There's actually, you could find written accounts praising Nicholas to Washington about some of the either the loyalists that they're finding. They're getting information about the composition of the enemy forces in the area. But Washington sees this as the opportunity. They have the foothold in there. Winter is here. That they're going to have to shut down for pretty soon. So it takes advantage of that, and that's what leads to the Battle of Assunpink Creek and Trenton, which again, major victories. Great way to go into a winter campaign, having stymied the British from taking Philadelphia. At that time in the winter, then that the Marines are kind of broken up. Again, they're still part of Washington's army, but they need to reconsolidate. I think Washington or Nicholas started with a battalion of about 130. It was about 80 after those battles due to just death and injury, a lot of cold casualties during this, because they went out on this expecting a single battle, essentially, that they're going to defend and return to the ships. So they weren't equipped for a long winter campaign at this point. So not enough shoes, not enough clothes, not enough food. And this was an opportunity where Nicholas really showed his resourcefulness, which, again, a big part of that, his Nassau attack, too, was kind of making the most with what he had available. And part of, I believe, why he was selected in the first place as a Marine captain was, again, not just recruitment, but his connections with the local businesses. He knows how to get the stores and do the deals that he needs to. And those, when you have good connections with Congress, that probably helps as well. So he's able to equip his men. But at this time, they're also kind of broken up. That it was seen as Marines have more experience with the naval guns, certainly more than the average soldier would. So they join General Knox's artillery. As a former artillery officer myself, I take great pride in the Marines being part of artillery early on in our history or in our heritage, but it unfortunately means that the Marine battalion is broken up and that Nicholas has no battalion to command anymore. And it's interesting, in a post 9/11 or post GWAT view of this, you start to see, oh, he is in many ways kind of the first individual augment in this campaign, that he essentially becomes a quartermaster and adjutant for the Army, where, again, he's running all of these logistics, ferrying French uniforms in stores between Boston and Philadelphia, again, trying to just supply the Army. So yeah, it was very interesting. It's one of those that I don't think would have been recognized 30 years ago, what kind of position that was. But he tires of the staff role. He wants to get back to leading Marines. And as I mentioned before, as a major, there's no ship for him, except that the USS America is under construction at this time, a 74-gun ship of the line in Portsmouth. He is one of many senior Marines, but he is the most senior Marine requesting this posting. And at this point, Congress kind of brushed it aside, like, yes, maybe it's not far enough along, quite frankly, in its construction for that. And it's around this time that Robert Morris approaches him about the secret mission that I cover through much of this article. And to help set the context for this, I mentioned before, I used the phrase kind of on the edge of a knife in that winter of 76. And in many ways, even in 1781, it was by no means a sure thing that the revolution was going to go America's way. Just financially, the colonies were essentially broken. Inflation was outrageous because Congress kept printing money with no specie backing it. And the debts of the war just kept rising. There were literal mutinies. Only a month earlier, the Morristown Mutiny, 1,500 soldiers revolted over the poor winter conditions and lack of pay. At one point, Washington is it's actually on their way to Yorktown, coming through Philadelphia. He goes to Robert Morris, who, again, is known as the financier of the revolution. Well-to-do businessman in Philadelphia, somebody that that Nicholas knew intimately. They were part of the same social clubs in Philadelphia. So one of the richest men in the colonies at the time too. But as I was saying, Washington is marching through the city and essentially needing to plead with Morris. He went ahead of the army like, I need a month's pay to get them to Yorktown. And I want to find, I know I included Morris's quote here. He's very eloquent and verbose and wrote a lot of notes, which is wonderful for historians. But I want to quote him here after acquiescing to Washington that my funds and resources being at the time totally inadequate to make that advance, and at the same time answer the various calls and demands that are indispensable. That he's fully aware, like the army has to get paid to keep going, but he has no money to pay the army. And it's thankfully around this time that he gets word that Benjamin Franklin was able to secure a loan or a series of loans from King Louis that they've been trying at for years. I should point out too that the advance, well, not an advance, it was back pay, and insufficient back pay that he was giving Washington. He's shortly after going to General Rochambeau trying to get personal funds for him to cover that. So it's in many ways swapping IOUs all over the place. So he was very pleased to hear that September 1781, that three French ships were bringing 2.5 million French livres or French pounds bound for Philadelphia. Unfortunately, a storm set them into Boston. Now, today doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Unfortunately, back then, you have British and Loyalist infested New York and New Jersey between Philadelphia and Boston. And he needed a way to get all of that money to Philadelphia. And so that was, to help put it into perspective, 81 tons of coins that they had to transport to do that. And he kept very meticulous diaries, which I mentioned are wonderful, where he's going into every meeting he's having. Like, he'll end each day talking about everyone he met with. And he is riddled with anxiety about this because he knows how important he's relieved that it arrived, but God damn it, why couldn't it get straight to Philadelphia? Why do I need this additional challenge? And I want to quote him again because he's trying to lay out who can I trust to do this, and it is therefore necessary to have a gentleman of approved honor and honesty, of mercantile knowledge and abilities, and of such an active and indefatigable disposition as will be able to surmount difficulties and guard against dangers on the road. In short, a person who has resource in himself to surmount all obstacles, so as finally to accomplish this business to universal satisfaction by delivering the treasures safely to this city. He needs somebody resourceful, is maybe a much more succinct way of putting it. But yeah, he had the time and leisure, I guess, every night to really expound. So he first selects Tench Francis, who is another businessman in Philadelphia. He was a member of the Philadelphia Associators, which again is a militia unit. But ironically, despite that, there were a lot of people who questioned his loyalty to the revolutionary cause. Morris had no doubts about that. I think it went back to, I believe Francis's father was an attorney that I forget who exactly he maybe had supported prior to the war, and it was something to that effect that. But either way, that was something that certainly wore on Francis, and Morris really saw this is a good opportunity for you to prove what I already know about you, that you are loyal to this cause. He certainly has that mercantile knowledge and ability that he was looking for. But Morris knew, again, this is very important, and so he decided, for the greater security of the treasure, I shall direct Major Samuel Nicholas of the Marines to go with him and aid and assist him throughout. That, again, Nicholas and Morris knew each other well. He was well acquainted with his accomplishments, that resourcefulness at Nassau to take all of that treasure without a shot fired. There's a certain level of inflappability involved with that. The military prowess that he shows both in Washington's army and in that squadron attack. And then certainly that time is that individual augment. You could say, like, he knows how to do business. That he was already running supplies between Boston and Philadelphia. That he was an apt choice for this, quite frankly, in my opinion, at least. So he writes in his journal how then Nicholas cheerfully agrees to the journey and says he can be ready tomorrow. And it's very interesting to look through Nicholas's, or rather Morris's, writings on this. That you could feel the anxiety release, like once he has his team picked, and but it's still there because he's leaving. He sends them with instructions that had to be dozens of pages long. Where it's very explicit of you need horses or oxen of this age, horses of this age, this many teams, these type of teamsters. The chests for all of these coins need to be of these dimensions. You need to add these to the ox carts to make them stronger. But at the same time, I need you to be resourceful and think on your feet. And so you could tell, like, it's a level of anxiety. I need to quote him again, because he's verbose, but I like the way he puts it sometimes, that it's my intention to have this money brought from Boston to this place as soon as the necessary attention to its safety will permit. At the same time, I mean to have it transported with the utmost possible economy. So it's kind of like, I want safely and fast as possible, but also in an economic manner. That it's a very tight Venn diagram intersection point to fulfill his desires. But Francis and Nicholas are definitely the men for this. They head out at once, September 11th in 1781. For Boston. They make their way up there. It takes them a couple weeks to then, once they receive the funds, they transfer them into banknotes so that they're carrying half the weight. Again, that was part of Morris's instructions. They assemble a team of 14 ox carts, 4 carts, and a lead horse to carry what ends up being about 32 tons of coins, plus all of the food and luggage and everything for the men. Like, this is a large team. So it ends up about 5,000 pounds, I think, per team. That's actually a fairly reasonable burden for the roads that they'll be doing. And they set out, and Morris gave them instructions to be as secretive as possible. Don't let anyone know why you have an ox cart team of 14 going as fast as possible. But tell them to take, like, if they're sharing with anyone, give alternate routes to your path. They're trying to avoid the hot spots in New York, like stay as far away as they can of New York while still going fast. They end up being only about 80 miles outside of New York City at their closest as they're going. And they arrange for military escort along the way, both cavalry and infantry. And I think their instructions are, once they get into New York, to haul ass is maybe the more succinct way of putting it. Is Morris's instructions: just go as reasonably move with as much rapidity as your cattle will permit. And it was thankfully an uneventful journey for them. What I'm sure was incredibly stressful when Nicholas arrived the day before on November 5th to essentially say, we made it. What are our directions? Who do you want us to deposit to? Which they go and do the next day. And I would love to have been there to see, like, from Nicholas's perspective, the change in Philadelphia at the time, because the whole world changed over the course of this trip. When they were leaving Boston, they were likely aware of the victory at Virginia Capes, the French victory there, because it occurred less than a week earlier. I think it was 6 days earlier. And the siege on Yorktown had started at that point. But it was over the course of their march that the siege ends, that news of the victory had reached Philadelphia a few days earlier than Francis and Nicholas. And like, I'm sure the partying was still going. Like, obviously, knowing now that marks more or less the end of the war, wasn't obvious quite then, but a massive victory. And again, it's not just the perspective on the war had to have been different at that point, especially now that we had a Congress that could fund itself. And the effects of that were almost immediate. It gets deposited into the Treasury, and then around that same time, Morris is starting the Bank of North America with the approval of Congress. I think officially starts in January that final year. Tench Francis is the first cashier for that. Mm. They are able to then start issuing new banknotes backed in specie. It drives down inflation. We can start paying back our debts. We can start paying the soldiers and Marines and sailors that have gone without pay. We can start building credit then as well, that it's now a soluble government, essentially, that it kept the war from a financial catastrophe, which it was on the edge of. Exciting news for Nicholas is he finds out, hey, you can command that squad or the detachment of Marines on the America. Unfortunately, it gets rescinded a little after that. In a cruel sense of irony, he helped secure the funding to keep the government going, but it wasn't quite enough to build his new command. Or in many ways, it was because those funds came from France, he no longer had that ship. So the earlier that year, the 74-gun Magnifique had run aground in Boston Harbor, and rather than spending the funds to complete America, because again, yes, we have this money now, but it was a loan, and we need to pay it back, and that was going to be a very expensive ship, and quite frankly, we were never going to outgun the British Navy at that time. So it was deemed as more cost-effective to give it as a gift to France, essentially help pay off that loan, because we owed a great debt to King Louis at that time, both financially and existentially, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. So it was unfortunate for Morris, he never got that command, but for Nicholas that he got that command. But as Morris said, that it was a reasonable tribute of gratitude to a prince whose exertions in our favor have been both generous and great. Mm-hmm. So I knew nothing of this secret mission before digging into this. It was a very exciting find, and really seeing how the stars aligned to it, I found very interesting. That mm-hmm. like those high points that most that are aware of Nicholas and the Continental Marines, that attack on New Providence, the squadron attack, his time with Washington's army, how they really did prepare him for that. It's unfortunate that was essentially the end of his Marine career, but he certainly set the stage. I think it's not. Some will talk about how I think we look too closely into it if we're to say like, hey, he showed us that it's a sure thing that after that New Providence attack, we will be like, it's a straight line between that and the Pacific campaign of World War II. There are a lot of other things that had to happen in between then, but he built that heritage that the Marine Corps definitely built itself upon.
Yes, indeed. And the fact that he's involved in that secret undertaking,
Yeah.
that it's kind of under the radar, so people don't really think about it much. But
Yeah.
you're right; it was profoundly huge in
Yeah.
its outcome, and the stakes were so high. They're lucky they got through unnoticed and unscathed, but because that's a lot more complicated than like
Yeah.
smuggling a sheaf of secret documents through enemy
Look
lines.
at it. Yeah. Can you imagine the
14 million
counterfactuals or the
cards.
what ifs of that had they been captured?
Yeah. Oh
by-
my God. I mean, and just the fact they slipped through, it's like nothing to see here, folks. Just a long ox train. But and yeah, it was the shot in the arm that the cause needed right at that moment when things are finally starting to happen in a good way.
Absolutely.
An interesting aside about the America ending up going to France is another officer who was counting on that command who didn't get it, of course, is John Paul Jones.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what triggers him to leave kind of with a sour taste in his mouth and Rome and Europe and all that afterwards. So a lot of side effects from that being given to France. But like you say, it made perfect sense at the time.
Yeah.
To do so.
Yeah.
So Nicholas is worthy of remembering, and he's a fascinating and figure who sets a good example, I think, for Marine officers going forward right from the get-go. And there's more to the story than most people realize, which I think is what's so great about this article. And I want to thank you again for having it appear in the magazine. It's our cover story, folks, and it sets off the stage for all the other Marine coverage in the magazine as well. And of course, you can't summarize the entire history of the storied Marine Corps in a few articles and one issue of a magazine, but you can kind of touch some of the highlights that mark that anniversary occasion, which is what we've done with this and with this wonderful piece by you, Bill. Thank you again. I hope we can have you in the magazine again sometime soon. It's been a while, and it's always a pleasure to have you in there. A Marine historian who covers the age of sail is a really nice kind of rare bird for us. So we're always glad to see what you have, and this was a perfect capstone to our 250th commemorative coverage. And I recommend it to all who haven't read it yet. It's out there now. And I want to thank you again for joining us today, Bill. It's been a wonderful conversation, very interesting, and hopefully it'll spur people to read the article because there's more to it there. So thanks again for joining us. I think that's it for us today, folks. I'm Eric Mills, Editor-in-Chief of Naval History Magazine. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.